The elevator doors opened on the 32nd floor, and Michael Carter stepped out carrying the faint smell of machine oil and morning coffee. He wore clean clothes, dark slacks, a gray button-down, sleeves rolled to the forearm, nothing tailored, nothing designed to impress. A leather portfolio tucked under one arm, the kind you buy at a drugstore because it's functional and nothing more. The receptionist looked up from her curved white desk and did a small double-take. Not because he was remarkable, because he was entirely unremarkable, and no one unremarkable came to this floor without a reason. "Mr. Carter?" she asked. "They're ready for you in conference room A." He followed her without speaking. The hallway was the kind of hallway that cost money, not in obvious ways, but in the way the carpet swallowed sound, in the way the lighting was warm without being warm, in the way every surface reflected just enough to make you feel watched. Conference room A had a glass wall facing the open floor. From where Michael stood at the threshold, he could see perhaps 40 desks, 40 people looking up from their screens. Word had traveled. Everyone knew someone from facilities was being called up to meet the CEO. The spectacle of it hadn't been lost on any of them. He walked in and sat down. 3 people were already seated. A man from HR whose name Michael didn't know, a woman from legal he'd seen once in the lobby, and at the head of the table, Emily Lawson. She was exactly as described. 36, precise features, dark hair pulled back with no strand out of place. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white blouse, and her posture suggested a person who had never slouched in a chair in her life. Her eyes were a particular shade of gray-green that caught light differently depending on angle, and in this moment they were aimed at him with the steady attention of someone used to making assessments quickly. "Mr. Carter," she said. "Thank you for coming up. Your assistant said it wasn't optional," he replied. The HR man cleared his throat. Emily Lawson didn't blink. "Fair enough," she said. "I'll be direct. We've reviewed your work here over the past 9 months. The HVAC overhaul in Building 2, the electrical rerouting on floors 12 through 15, the subcontractor coordination during the lobby renovation. You delivered all 3 under budget and ahead of schedule. The contractors you managed speak highly of you." Michael said nothing. Emily placed a single sheet of paper on the table and slid it toward him. "We'd like to offer you a full-time position. Director of Facilities Operations. The salary is listed at the bottom. Benefits are first tier. There's a performance review at 6 months." Michael picked up the paper. He read it. He set it back down. "No," he said. The legal woman stopped writing. The HR man looked at his folder as though he'd misheard. Emily Lawson leaned back exactly 1 inch. "Excuse me? I appreciate the consideration. But no. May I ask why?" "You may." He didn't elaborate. The silence stretched long enough to become something physical. Emily's fingers, which had been resting flat on the table, curled slightly inward. "Mr. Carter," she said, "this is a significant offer. We don't bring contractors into director-level positions. This would be. I understand what it is. Then help me understand the refusal." Michael looked at her for a moment. "Not long. Long enough. I don't work for people like you," he said. The legal woman's pen stopped moving entirely. "People like me," Emily repeated. The tone was flat, precise, dangerous in the way a blade is dangerous before it moves. People who offer something because they need it, not because they want to give it. He stood and picked up his portfolio. "The offer is about the renovation contract renewal in Q4. You want someone you own on the inside. I'm not interested in being owned." He buttoned his collar. Not because it needed it, because it gave him something to do with his hands while the room reassembled itself around his words. "Thank you for your time, Miss Lawson." He walked out. Through the glass wall, every set of eyes on the open floor tracked him to the elevator. The button pinged. The doors closed. Emily Lawson sat with her hands flat on the table and stared at the space where he'd been sitting. "Should I rescind his contractor access?" the HR man asked carefully. "No," she said. "Should I? Leave it." She picked up the paper he'd left behind and looked at the empty chair. "Why do I feel like I've seen you before?" The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had been renovated twice and both times incompletely. The stairwell light on the third landing flickered every 6 seconds. Michael had reported it twice and fixed it himself on the third week when he realized no one was coming. He unlocked the door and found Lily at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and a library book propped open against the sugar jar. She was 7 years old and had his dark hair and someone else's eyes lighter, warmer, the color of amber held to sunlight. She looked up when the door opened. "You're home early," she said. "Meeting ended fast. Did you get the job?" Michael set his keys on the hook by the door. He'd told her there was a meeting. He hadn't told her what kind. "No," he said. Lily considered this with the seriousness of someone 3 times her age. She turned a page in her book. "Was it a bad job?" "It was a fine job." "Then why didn't you take it?" He sat down across from her and poured himself a glass of water. It came with strings attached. Like what strings? Like the kind where someone does something nice for you so you owe them. Lily absorbed this. "Mrs. Patterson does that. She gives us candy before she asks us to help clean up. Exactly like that." She nodded slowly, satisfied. She ate a spoonful of cereal and looked back at her book. Then, "Dad. Are we okay?" "We're fine. Because Tommy Chen's dad got laid off and they had to move. We're not moving." She looked at him. 7 years old and already she had that look, the one that said she was checking whether he was telling the full truth or just enough of it. He met her eyes steadily. "Okay," she said, and looked back at her book. He made dinner. Something simple: pasta and a jarred sauce he dressed up with garlic and dried basil and a can of white beans because Lily had recently decided she liked beans. They ate at the table with the window open. 5 floors up, the street noise was filtered to something almost pleasant. After dinner, while Lily was in the bath, Michael went to the closet shelf where he kept a shoebox wrapped in a rubber band. He took it down and set it on the bed. He didn't open it. He just held it in his hands for a moment. Inside was a photograph. A woman, partially visible, the rest of the image cut away, and a small folded card with a date on it, 8 years ago, and a hospital discharge paper with a name that wasn't his. He put the box back on the shelf. When Lily came out in her pajamas with her hair damp, she climbed into bed, and he read to her from the library book something about a girl who built a robot from spare parts and taught it to plant seeds. By the time the robot had its first harvest, Lily was asleep. Michael turned off the lamp and sat in the dark for a while. He thought about Emily Lawson's eyes when he'd said what he'd said. The way her expression hadn't broken, hadn't flinched, but had shifted in some microscopic way, like something had moved behind the glass. He told himself it didn't matter. He almost believed it. Emily Lawson did not obsess over things. This was not a virtue she'd cultivated, it was a structural fact. Obsession required the kind of mental real estate she'd learned to reallocate. When a deal fell apart, she autopsied it cleanly and moved to the next one. When a relationship ended, she archived it. When a person surprised her, she cataloged the surprise and filed it under data point. Update model. Proceed. Michael Carter was not filing neatly. On Wednesday, she called HR. Pull everything on the contractor, Carter, Michael, facilities. The file arrived Thursday morning. She read it twice. It was, almost insultingly, thin. 9 months of work history with Lawson Group. Before that, 3 years of contract work across various companies, always physical infrastructure, always delivered cleanly. Before that, 2 years of something listed as independent consultation with no client names. Before that, nothing. Or rather, not nothing, a year of military service records that were sealed behind a layer of federal classification she didn't have access to. Before 8 years ago, Michael Carter essentially did not exist in any database she could reach. She sat back in her chair. That was not normal. That was not how a person's life looked unless someone had deliberately constructed it to look that way. She pulled the incident report she'd been avoiding pulling for 8 years. It was a thin file, the paper version, because it predated her company's digital archive. She'd had it scanned once and never opened the scan. Now she opened it. February 14th. Attempted abduction. Target: Emily Lawson, then VP of Meridian Capital. Assailants: 3 individuals, since convicted. Incident occurred in the parking structure of the Meridian Building, downtown. Target sustained a laceration to the left forearm and a moderate concussion from impact with a vehicle. Unknown male intervened, incapacitating 2 assailants and assisting target to safety before departing the scene. Male declined to provide identification. Witness accounts: athletic build, dark hair, approximately 30-35 years of age, moved with trained precision. No further identification possible. Target hospitalized and released the following morning. No memory of rescue event consistent with concussion. She touched the scar on her left forearm. She always told people it was from a hiking accident. She closed the file. The dreams had started not long after the incident. Fragments. Disconnected. Rain hammering a parking garage floor. The sound of something metal skidding across concrete. A voice very close to her ear saying, "Don't move. I've got you," and then nothing. She'd attributed them to trauma response and moved on. Now she sat in her glass-walled office and watched the city below and thought about a man who had no history before 8 years ago, who moved like someone trained to move quickly in confined spaces, who had looked at her across a conference table with the flat, careful eyes of someone who already knew exactly who she was. She thought about what he'd said. "I don't work for people like you." Not, "I don't want this job." Not, "The terms don't suit me." He'd said people like you. Specific, pointed. The kind of thing you said to someone you had a judgment about. A pre-existing judgment. Emily Lawson did not obsess over things. She picked up the phone. "I need you to find me a reason to bring Carter back on site," she told her assistant. "Something real. A legitimate contract. Make it infrastructure, something that actually needs doing. The HVAC units on 17 have been flagged. Perfect. Draw up the paperwork." She hung up and looked at the scar on her forearm and said nothing for a long time. The contract was for the 17th floor HVAC system. It was legitimate work, the units genuinely needed servicing, and Michael Carter was, on paper, the best contractor they had on file for this kind of job. No one could reasonably object to the assignment. He showed up Monday morning, signed in at the lobby, and rode the elevator to 17 without going near the 32nd floor. Emily arranged her schedule to include 2 site visits. She told her assistant it was about facilities oversight. Her assistant, who had worked with her for 4 years and understood the architecture of her deflections, simply noted it on the calendar. The first visit was brief. Michael was in the ceiling space when she arrived, visible only from the waist down through an access panel. She asked the building manager 2 questions about ventilation capacity and left. The second visit, she timed better. He was standing at the main unit panel with a diagnostic tablet when she came through the door. He heard her, looked over his shoulder, and looked back at the panel. "Miss Lawson," he said, without inflection. "Mr. Carter." She stopped at a reasonable distance. "How's the assessment coming?" 3 of the 6 units need coil replacement. The ducting on the north side has a compression issue that's been ongoing probably since the original install. That's the real source of the inefficiency, not the units themselves. "How long for repairs?" 8 days if you approve the scope this week. 12 if the approval goes through normal channels. She nodded. "I'll expedite it." "I assumed you would." He said it without edge, just a statement of observed fact. She found it, somehow, more irritating than if he'd been openly antagonistic. She moved to look at the unit he was working on. He gave her room without making it obvious he was giving her room. Stepped back 1 pace, adjusted his angle, kept his eyes on the tablet. She noticed it. She noticed it the way you notice something that wasn't quite right about a painting, a detail that didn't fit the frame you'd expected. "You have a background in HVAC specifically, or infrastructure generally?" she asked. "Generally. Where'd you learn?" "Various places." That's not an answer. He looked at her then. "Brief. Level. I know." She studied the panel readout. "The military records in your file are sealed." His expression didn't change. "HR told you about that. It's my company. I can see what's in the file. Then you know what you know. I know you existed differently 8 years ago than you exist now. Most people do. Not like this. He set the tablet down on the top of the unit. He turned to face her fully, which surprised her slightly. She'd expected him to maintain the angle, the distance. Instead, he looked at her directly. And for just a moment, she felt the particular quality of his attention as something heavy and deliberate. Like something very large, moving carefully. What is it you're actually asking, Miss Lawson? She held his gaze. I'm asking why you look at me like you already know me. A pause. Something crossed his face, not quite a flicker, not quite recognition. A controlled thing. Whatever it was, I don't look at you any particular way, he said. He picked up the tablet. He went back to work. She stood there for another moment. And then she left. In the elevator going down, her hand drifted to the inside of her left forearm. She pressed 2 fingers against the scar. Old habit. Something she did without thinking, the way other people touched their temples when they were trying to remember something. The next morning, she was moving fast through the lobby when someone from the mailroom stepped out from a doorway with a full cart. The impact didn't happen. She didn't quite understand why until she realized Michael Carter was standing beside her, one hand having caught her arm and redirected her momentum in a single fluid motion that had barely registered as a movement at all. She looked up at him. He was already releasing her arm. Sorry, he said. Reflex. Where did you learn to move like that? But he was already walking away, badge held flat to his side, the same measured pace he always maintained, and he didn't answer. It was a Friday afternoon when Lily appeared. Michael had arranged for her to be picked up from school by a neighbor on the days he worked late. But the pickup had fallen through, the neighbor had a medical appointment, the school had called his cell when he was 2 floors up without reception, and by the time he saw the message, he was already packing up to leave. He found Lily in the lobby. She was sitting in one of the low chairs near the reception desk, feet not quite reaching the floor, reading the same library book she'd had for 2 weeks. She'd apparently told the security guard very seriously that she was waiting for her dad, and that she was fine, and that she had snacks in her bag. The security guard looked relieved when Michael appeared. She was very clear about the snacks, the guard said. She usually is. Lily looked up from her book. Hi, Dad. Hi, kid. We talked about calling when plans change. I did call. You didn't answer. So I took the bus. He closed his eyes briefly. He opened them. We're going to discuss this at home. Okay. She hopped off the chair and tucked the book under her arm with complete equanimity. They were nearly to the door when Emily Lawson came through the lobby with her assistant and 2 people from legal. She stopped when she saw Michael, which caused a brief pileup behind her. Her eyes moved from him to Lily. Lily looked at her with the frank, unhurried assessment of a child who had no reason to be impressed by anyone. Hello? Lily said. Hello, Emily said. This is my dad. I know. We work together sometimes. He does your HVAC. He does. Lily nodded as if this confirmed something she'd been told. Then, he doesn't like rich people very much, especially CEOs. Lily, Michael said. It's true, Lily said, reasonably. Emily looked at Michael. Something in her expression had loosened, very slightly, in the way a fist loosens when the urgency of holding on passes. It's all right, she said, to Lily. Why do you think he doesn't like CEOs? Lily thought about it. He says some people give things to get things, and CEOs give the most so they can get the most. That's a very specific critique. What's a critique? A careful reason for not liking something. Lily nodded, satisfied with the definition. She looked at Emily for another moment with those amber eyes. He saved someone once, she said, a long time ago. But she forgot him. She paused. He said that's okay, that she was safe and that was enough. The lobby was not quiet. There were phones ringing, the distant percussion of the revolving door. A conversation happening across the space, but in the small bubble of the 3 of them, something had gone very still. Michael put his hand briefly on Lily's shoulder. Let's go. Bye, Lily told Emily. Emily watched them walk through the lobby doors and out into the afternoon light. The two lawyers behind her exchanged a glance. Her assistant looked at her phone. Emily stood for a moment longer. She forgot him. He said that's okay. She touched the scar on her forearm. It was not okay. She didn't know yet exactly what it was, but she knew, with the sudden cold clarity of something arriving late, that it was not okay. She pulled the archived incident footage on a Sunday, alone in her office, with the city gray and quiet below the windows. The parking structure cameras from 8 years ago had been low resolution and poorly positioned, the kind of coverage that technically existed but practically told you very little. She knew this because she'd been told so at the time, by the detective who'd handled the case. What she hadn't known was that the camera on level 2, the one closest to where she'd been found, had captured 12 seconds of usable footage before taking a power hit from a severed cable. She watched it 4 times. A figure moving through the frame. Carrying something. Carrying someone. Moving fast, purposefully. Not running, but close to running. The controlled economy of motion of a person who knew that speed and precision were not opposites. The resolution was too poor to confirm a face, but she knew the way he moved. She had been watching him move for 3 weeks. She found the full incident report next. The one that hadn't been included in the thin version she'd read before the supplementary document. The one with the responding officer's personal notes. Unknown male, present at scene, declined all identification. Carried victim approximately 40 meters from point of attack to service exit. Victim unconscious. Male sustained what appeared to be a gunshot wound to the left shoulder. Did not seek medical attention. Exited through service stairwell before EMS arrival. One witness, parking attendant, level 1, reported seeing a man exit the building through the east service door. Hand pressed to shoulder, moving north on foot. Did not stop. Was not found. She sat back. Left shoulder. She thought about the way Michael Carter always rotated his left arm slightly inward when he reached overhead. The way his left sleeve sat differently than his right. The way he'd caught her arm in the lobby and used his right hand to do it, even though the geometry of the moment would have made the left hand easier. She stood up and walked to the window. Below, the Sunday streets were nearly empty. A cab, a cyclist, the ordinary machinery of a city at rest. A gunshot wound, and he walked north on foot, alone. She thought about the shoebox she imagined he might have. She thought about a 7-year-old girl who said he saved someone, but she forgot him. She thought about a man who had said, "You should stop digging, Miss Lawson, not I don't know what you're talking about. Not, you've got the wrong person. Just, stop digging," which meant there was something to dig up. She called him Monday morning. "I need 5 minutes," she said. Not about work. A pause. Conference room? No. The roof garden. Noon. Another pause. All right. She was there first. The roof garden was largely decorative, a PR gesture, rooftop greenery photographed for the company's sustainability report and otherwise unused on weekday afternoons. She stood near the east railing, where you could see the old Meridian building 3 blocks away, its glass facade catching the pale noon light. She heard him come through the door and didn't turn immediately. "Was it you?" she said. That night, she heard him stop walking. She turned. He was standing 6 feet away, hands at his sides, the same controlled stillness he always carried. But something in his face had shifted, not much, not visibly in any way she could easily name, but the quality of his attention had changed. It had become something heavier. He said nothing. "February 14th, she said. 8 years ago. Parking structure, Meridian Capitol building. 3 men. I was..." She stopped. She didn't know exactly what had happened. She'd been told, clinically, but she had no memory of it. "I was hurt. Someone carried me out. Someone who took a bullet doing it and walked away anyway." He looked at her for a long moment. "You should stop digging, Miss Lawson," he said. Not a denial, not a deflection. Just, stop. "I can't. You can. You've gone 8 years without knowing. You can go the rest of your life. That's not your decision to make." Something crossed his face. Not anger. Something more complicated than anger, the expression of a person encountering a truth they'd prepared for, but hadn't quite prepared for the weight of. "It was you," she said quietly. He looked at her. He didn't say yes. He didn't have to. Her mind produced it, then not a memory, exactly, but a sensation. The lurching disorientation of weight in motion, the feeling of being carried, the smell of rain and copper and something burning, and a voice very close and very steady saying, "Don't stop breathing, you're going to be fine." She'd always thought that fragment was invented, something her mind had constructed to fill the gap. Now she understood it wasn't. "You were shot," she said. "I've had worse, and you never came forward, never contacted the police, never." She stopped. "Why?" He looked away briefly, toward the Meridian building. "Because I wasn't supposed to be there. What I was doing that night, it was work that didn't officially exist. Coming forward would have complicated things. For you. For other people. And you thought that was your call to make. I thought it was the only call available." He looked back at her. "You were alive. That was the goal. Everything else was administrative." "Administrative?" she repeated. "I didn't say it was right. I said it was the decision I made." The wind moved through the rooftop plantings and carried the sound of traffic from below, and she stood there for a moment with the weight of 8 years recalibrating itself across her understanding of her own life. "I owe you. You don't owe me anything." "I do." "No." His voice was quiet and absolute. "You lived. That was the point. The accounting stops there." He turned toward the door. "Michael." She hadn't used his first name before. He stopped. "I forgot you. For 8 years. I didn't know you existed, and you watched me from the outside of that," and she didn't finish the sentence. He stood with his back to her for a moment. "You were safe," he said. That was enough. He went through the door. It closed without a sound. She stood on the roof for a long time. The Meridian building glittered 3 blocks away, indifferent and polished and full of other people's present moments. She pressed her fingers to the scar on her forearm and breathed. That was enough, she thought. For him, maybe. Not for her. She'd built this company from a second-hand desk in a rented office when she was 26 years old. She'd made decisions that cost her sleep and relationships, and once, a very long friendship. She'd never allowed herself the indulgence of things she couldn't account for: sentiment, gratitude, guilt over things she didn't choose and couldn't remember. The structure of her life had been built on the premise that she owed it to the work to be clear-eyed and present and unapologetic about the cost of both. And now she was standing on a rooftop she'd never actually used, in the gray middle of a Tuesday afternoon, undone by 12 seconds of low-resolution footage and a 7-year-old's offhand comment. She did not cry. She was not going to cry about this. She put her hand flat against the railing, felt the cold of the metal, and used it the way she used most things, as an anchor, a reference point, something solid in the unreliable physics of the present moment. Then she straightened her jacket and went back inside and did the rest of her work, because the work did not stop for revelations, and she had learned long ago that the only way through a thing was through it. The crisis arrived on a Thursday. It came in the form of a call from Marcus Webb, who managed their Asia-Pacific Development Partnership, the largest single deal the company had in progress, a joint infrastructure project worth 11 figures over 7 years. Webb called at 6 a.m. to say that their counterpart in Singapore had received documentation. Financial documentation suggesting Lawson Group had misrepresented its liability exposure in the preliminary agreements. The documentation was fabricated. Emily knew this within 30 minutes of reading it, but fabricated documents in the hands of a deal partner, transmitted through anonymous channels with enough plausible sourcing to require legal investigation, were not something you simply denied and moved past. They were a grenade with a slow fuse, and someone had thrown it deliberately. By noon, she had 3 lawyers, 2 financial analysts, and her CFO in the conference room. By 2 p.m., she had a preliminary list of people who had access to the financial records that had been manipulated to produce the false documents. The list had 9 names. She knew all of them. She went through the day with the careful efficiency of someone managing a building fire, systematically, without panic, prioritizing exits. Her team was good. She had protocols. By evening, they'd narrowed the access window, identified the transmission pathway, and had a strong candidate for the source, a name she hadn't expected. She sat in her office at 9 o'clock at night, with the city fully dark below her, and looked at the evidence and felt, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely uncertain about what to do next, because the name was someone she'd trusted, and trust, when it turned out to be misplaced, had a particular quality of wreckage that efficiency couldn't fully clear. She thought, without meaning to, about Michael Carter. She'd thought about him every day since the roof. Not obsessively, practically. The way you thought about an unresolved equation when you were trying to move on to other math. She hadn't told her assistant to call him. She hadn't reached out. She'd given him the space of his own choice, because he had made clear that he did not want to be folded into her life, and she had barely, with effort, respected that. She called him at 9:30. "There's a problem," she said, when he answered. A pause. Then, "I heard. The kind of document leak that happened today generates a specific pattern of secondary communications. I noticed some of them this afternoon." She sat with that for a moment. "You've been paying attention. I pay attention to most things. Do you know who? I have a strong suspicion. I'd need to verify before I said the name." She closed her eyes briefly. "Verify it, please." Silence for a moment. "I'll call you back." He hung up. In the interim, Lily got sick. Michael called at 10:15, not with the name, but with, "I need to handle something. Lily has a fever. I'll get back to you by morning." She found herself saying, "I'm fine." She's fine. It's a fever, not a crisis. A beat. Get some sleep. You'll think more clearly. That's not advice, Miss Lawson. Not an order. He hung up again. She sat in the dark office for another hour. Then she went home, because he was right, and she hated that he was right, and there was something almost consoling about being given a simple directive by someone who had no stake in her compliance and no agenda behind the suggestion. Get some sleep. You'll think more clearly. She slept 4 hours, which for a crisis week was almost good. He called at 6 a.m. "It's Denise Hargrove," he said. Emily was already awake, already dressed. She sat down slowly. "Denise has been with the company for 6 years. She's also been quietly feeding competitive intelligence to Morrison Partners for 14 months. The Singapore documents were the first move that involved active fabrication. Before that it was selective data, slow leaks, things that could plausibly be coincidence. How did you? I need you to trust the information without asking about the method. Can you do that?" She thought about it. She thought about a man who had no documented history before 8 years ago, who moved like someone trained in closed spaces, who had described his work on a February night 8 years ago as work that didn't officially exist. She thought about the diagnostic precision with which he'd identified the HVAC problem as a ducting issue rather than a unit failure on his first assessment. "Yes," she said. "Then you have what you need to run your own verification. Bank records look at the pattern of deposits into her secondary account number ending 7,714. The timing will map to the leak dates. You have her bank records. I have enough." She was already opening her laptop. "The Singapore call is in 4 hours. I know. I can't walk into that call and cite an anonymous source. You won't have to. Run the financial pattern through your forensic accounting firm. They've been on retainer for years, and they'll find it legitimately within 2 hours if they know where to look. Point them at the account. Let them find it themselves." She was already drafting the email to forensic accounting. Her fingers paused. "Michael, why are you doing this?" A pause. Not the evasive kind, the kind of pause a person made when they were choosing which true thing to say. "Because you earned what you've built," he said. "And someone tried to take it using methods you wouldn't use yourself. That matters to me, even though you don't work for people like me." Even though, she heard, in the background, a small voice saying something. "Lily." Asking for water. "Go," Emily said. "I've got it from here." She got it from here. By 9 o'clock, forensic accounting had confirmed the pattern. By 9:40, legal had prepared documentation for termination and referral to law enforcement. At 10:15, Emily had a private meeting with Denise Hargrove that lasted exactly 12 minutes and ended with Hargrove leaving the building escorted by security. At 11, Emily sat on the Singapore call and walked the counterpart team through the verified source of the fabricated documentation, the steps already taken, and the protections now in place. The call lasted 40 minutes. At the end of it, the deal was intact. She leaned back in her chair when the screen went dark. Her assistant knocked. "The team is, give them the afternoon off," Emily said. "All of them. Full pay, no questions." Her assistant hesitated. "All of them? Every single one." She called Michael. "It's done," she said. "I know. The Morrison Partners Board already issued an internal memo. I have a source there." "Of course you do." She looked at the ceiling. "Thank you." A pause. "You would have found it yourself," he said. "Within 48 hours. Maybe. Not maybe. You made it 38 hours faster. In this context, that's..." She stopped. "That's everything, actually." She heard him exhale slightly. Almost imperceptible. Almost not a sound. "How's Lily?" she asked. "Fever broke. She's eating toast and reading about robots." "Good. That's good." She turned her chair to face the window. "Michael, I need to say something. I expected you would eventually." She chose the roof garden again, not because it was convenient, because it was where the truth had started to come apart, and she wanted to be in the place where it had started when she finished pulling it the rest of the way open. He arrived 5 minutes after her, still in his work jacket, a thermos in one hand. He handed it to her without comment. She opened it and smelled coffee and accepted it, because refusing would have been theater. They stood at the railing together for a moment. The Meridian building caught the late afternoon light and threw it back. "I read the full report," she said. "Not the summary, the officer's supplementary notes. You were shot leaving the building. You walked north on foot. You never sought treatment at any emergency room within a 50-mile radius, I checked. There are other options. Operative options." He said nothing. "You were still active. 8 years ago. Whatever you were doing in that parking structure that night, it was part of something ongoing. That's why you couldn't come forward." She turned to look at him. "And then you stopped. Whatever you were doing, you stopped. And you became Michael Carter, contractor, single father, man with no history before a certain date." He looked at the city. "Lily," she said quietly. "She's the reason you stopped. She needed a father who came home." How old was she? 3 months. She absorbed that. 3 months old, and he'd been in a parking garage at night incapacitating trained assailants and carrying a stranger through gunfire. 3 months old, and he'd taken a bullet and walked away and not told anyone. "She doesn't know any of it," Emily said. "It wasn't a question. She knows I used to do work I can't talk about. She's 7. That's enough information for 7. Is it enough information for you?" He turned and looked at her then. Something in his expression that she hadn't seen before. Not vulnerability, exactly, but the thing adjacent to it. The thing that lives next door to vulnerability in people who have learned to board up the windows. "What do you mean?" "I mean, was it enough to walk away from all of it and not be seen? To know I was alive and safe and have no idea who I was?" She held his gaze. "You saved my life, and I walked around for 8 years without knowing your face, without knowing your name, without..." Her voice didn't break, but it came close, which surprised her. "That's not a small thing. That you had to carry." He looked away. "You weren't supposed to be someone I knew," he said. "You were a civilian in the wrong place. The mission was containment and exit. Bringing you to safety was..." He stopped. "It was the right thing to do. It was also an exposure I wasn't supposed to create. So you became anonymous to protect yourself, to protect the work, and the people still in it. And then you left. And then, Lily." She nodded. She looked at the Meridian building. "You came back," she said. 9 months ago. You could have bid on contracts anywhere. You came to this company. A pause. "I wanted to know you were all right," he said. From a distance. It was a poor decision in retrospect. Why poor? He glanced at her. Because distance turned out to be harder to maintain than expected. She felt something loosen in her chest. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a knot that's been worked at for a long time, finally finding give. "You saved my life," she said. "And I forgot you. And I treated you like a contractor. And I tried to buy your compliance with a job offer. You were being a CEO. I was being an idiot." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something in the neighborhood. "Michael." He looked at her for a long moment. "You don't owe me an apology. You didn't know. I know now." "Yes," he said. "You do." The wind moved through the rooftop greenery. The city below continued its vast, indifferent business. She handed him back the thermos and he took it, and they stood for a while in the particular silence of two people who have arrived somewhere neither of them entirely expected to be. "What you did today," she said. "With the Hargrove situation, that wasn't nothing. It was pattern recognition. I've done more complicated things." "I know. That's exactly my point." He waited. "You're good at it," she said. "At seeing things that are wrong and knowing what to do about them, and you've been doing it from the outside, from a distance, alone." She turned to face him fully. "That seems like a waste. Is this another job offer?" "No," she said. "It's not." She told him on a Saturday, at a park 3 blocks from his apartment. She'd asked if they could meet somewhere that wasn't the building. He'd suggested the park, and she'd shown up in jeans and a gray coat. No assistant, no folder. Nothing, except the clarity of someone who had spent a week deciding exactly what she wanted to say. Lily was there, because Saturday was Lily's day and Michael didn't negotiate on that. She was at the far end of the park on the climbing structure, moving with the fearless, physics-defying confidence of children who haven't yet learned to calculate risk. Emily watched her for a moment before she spoke. "What I'm proposing isn't employment," she said. "I want to be clear about that from the beginning. All right, the company is expanding. Not in the traditional sense. I'm building a risk and security division. Real infrastructure security. Physical and operational. The kind of thing that would have caught what Hargrove was doing 14 months earlier if it had existed." He said nothing. "I'm not asking you to work for me," she said carefully. "I'm asking if you'd consider a partnership. Co-design of the division. Your judgment alongside mine. Equity, not salary. Full autonomy over your methods within agreed parameters." He looked at her. "Why?" he said. "Because I trust your judgment. You barely know me. I know you took a bullet and walked north on foot and built a life in which you're available at 3 months. I know you assessed an HVAC problem correctly in 20 minutes that 3 other contractors had missed in 3 visits. I know you identified a 6-year internal leak in one night that my entire security team missed entirely." She paused. "And I know you came back to this company specifically because you wanted to know I was okay. That's not nothing, Michael. That's exactly the kind of judgment I want adjacent to mine." He was quiet for a moment. "Lily," he said finally. "She comes first. Always. I know. No last-minute emergencies that require me to choose between her and the job. If the choice presents itself, I choose her. That would be written into any agreement. And I'm not subordinate. Not to you. Not to anyone in your organization. I said equity and partnership. I need to hear you say not subordinate." She met his eyes. Not subordinate. He looked at Lily on the climbing structure. She had reached the top and was surveying the park with the expression of someone who had conquered a meaningful territory. "Dad," she called. "I can see our building from here. Can you?" He called back. "It's small. Everything's small from up high, kid." Lily appeared to consider this philosophical point and found it satisfactory. She began her descent with the same fearless precision. Emily watched her and said nothing for a moment. "She's going to be remarkable," Emily said quietly. "She already is." Lily arrived at ground level and came over at a run, stopping at Michael's side and looking up at Emily with those amber eyes. "You came to the park," she said. "I did. Do you like parks?" "I'm learning to." Lily considered her. "You look different outside." Better or worse? Lily tilted her head. More real? She said, with complete seriousness. Emily laughed. Not the controlled, managed expression she produced in meetings. An actual laugh startled out of her. It changed her face entirely. Michael watched it happen. She's right, he said. You look more real. Emily looked at him. Something in her expression quiet and open in a way that the 32nd floor version of her would not have recognized as her own face. Is that a yes? She asked. He was quiet for a moment longer. The park moved around them, children and dogs, and the ordinary miraculous noise of a Saturday afternoon. Lily had already wandered back toward the climbing structure, apparently satisfied with the diplomatic outcome. It's a conditional yes, he said. What's the condition? He looked at her steadily. That we do this as ourselves, not as CEO and contractor, not as person who was saved and person who did the saving. As two people who have decided to trust each other for practical, verifiable reasons. And what would you call those two people? He thought about it. Partners, he said. Just partners. She held out her hand. He shook it. Firm. Brief. The handshake of two people who understand that this is the beginning of something, and that beginnings deserve to be treated seriously. One more thing, he said, as she was turning to go. She stopped. I didn't come back for the offer, he said. The original one, or this one? I know, she said. I came back to make sure you'd survive without me. She was quiet for a moment. And, she said, he glanced toward Lily, who had reached the top of the climbing structure again, and was announcing her return to the top of the territory. And you would have, he said. You didn't need me. She turned back to look at him. Maybe not, she said. But I think I prefer this. He didn't answer. But he didn't look away. Lily called down from the top of the structure. Dad, Miss Lawson, you can both see everything from up here if you come up. Michael looked at Emily. Emily looked at the climbing structure. She was wearing good shoes and a dry-clean-only coat, and she had approximately zero experience with playground equipment, and it was, by any practical measure, a ridiculous suggestion. She walked to the base of the structure and started climbing. Behind her, she heard Michael make a sound she hadn't heard from him before. Quiet. Genuine. The sound of a person who has decided, after a long time of keeping things at careful distance, to let something be close. Lily grabbed Emily's hand at the top and pointed at the city below. There, Lily said. Your building. See? The tower was visible above the tree line, glass and steel. 32 floors of the life Emily had built. From up here it looked like what it was, one structure among many, neither large nor small, just present. I see it, Emily said. She stood at the top of a children's climbing structure in a dry-clean-only coat, holding the hand of a 7-year-old she'd met 2 weeks ago, and felt, for the first time, in a long time, that the view was exactly right. Below them, Michael stood at the base of the structure with his hands in his pockets and looked up, and for just a moment his face held the expression of someone who has carried something heavy for a very long time and has, quietly, without ceremony, set it down. The city moved. The afternoon light shifted. Somewhere nearby, a dog was being enthusiastically introduced to a child who had never met a dog before, and found this meeting to be the best thing that had happened all week. Life continued, in the ordinary, miraculous way that it does not in great, dramatic reversals, not in the clean narrative arcs that stories promise and reality rarely delivers, but in the accumulated weight of small decisions made by people trying, imperfectly, to be present for one another. A man who had spent 8 years keeping his distance